It was a shock, but not a surprise, I suppose, in that we all know that many cultural institutions are awash with people who wouldn't know free speech if it bit them on the backside.
The backlash to what she's come out with and suggested has been completely unhinged, as if somehow she's like a traitor to the cause for daring to raise these issues.
Deeply unimaginative, hectoring, nannying, no real ideas about growth, about how to get things going. In fact, everything they've done has destroyed growth.
Hello and welcome to the Spike podcast. I'm Fraser Myers, delighted to be back hosting, and also extra delighted to have some brilliant guests with me this week, including Spike columnist Joanna Williams, welcome.
Hello.
And Spike contributor Candice Holdsworth.
Hi.
We have got absolutely loads to discuss today. Tom Slater and I will be talking about Spike's film on censorship, which has been cancelled. Then we'll be discussing Shabana Mahmood, the hardline Labour Home Secretary, and whether the milkshake tax can save Rachel Reeves. And after that, then we'll carry on the conversation over on Spiked Podcast Unlocked, our exclusive bonus podcast for Spiked supporters. But before we get into all of those topics, I just want to remind everyone at home about Spike's internship program. The deadline is coming up. It's at the end of the month. This really is a golden opportunity to get your foot in the door of journalism. So if you know any budding writers or audio-visual producers, please let them know about this scheme. In fact, the last person to go through the internship program was hosting this very podcast last week. So it really is a huge opportunity, huge stepping stone if you want to get kick-started in a career in journalism. To find out more and to apply, just go to spiked-online.com/interns. That's spiked-online.com/interns. So anyone who's been following Spike this week will be aware that our free speech documentary, Think Before You Post, was due to have a premiere at the Rich Mix, but it was cancelled. A documentary about censorship, cancelled. The irony was not lost on us. To discuss this, I'm joined by Spike's editor, Tom Slater. Tom, we do actually have some good news to kick off with, though. Do you want to fill people in?
Yes, absolutely. So after a frantic search over the course of the past couple of days, we have located a new venue for the Tuesday the 25th, the day we were supposed to hold the premiere. Looks like it's going to be in central London, within striking distance of where the original venue was at Rich Mix. And we're going to notify anyone who's bought tickets or anyone who was signed up to come with that address in their inboxes. If there's anyone who wants to put their name down for the waiting list, we're pretty much sold out at this point, they should just email supporters@spiked-online.com. And if we get any dropouts, we can try and pack as many people in as we can. But no, uncancelled the event is the message as of Friday.
So that's the good news. Let's track back a bit. You know, it was Tuesday, a week to go for the event. We get this email from Rich Mix saying the film and the Q&A and potentially the speakers do not align with their values. What the hell are they talking about?
Well, precisely. I mean, it was a shock, but not a surprise, I suppose, in that we all know that many cultural institutions are awash with people who wouldn't know free speech if it bit them on the backside. I dare say this is an example of that. As you say, they said that the event didn't align with their values. Clearly, free speech isn't one of those values, but there we go. And they essentially listed all of these reasons as to why we couldn't be hosted. But part and parcel of that was this idea that we hadn't confirmed to them the content of the film and the panelists themselves. Let's put it this way. When we booked the venue, we had already had the film out. It was already wrapped up, north of 100,000 views. And all the people we were due to speak on that panel are in the film. So we'll allow people to make up their own minds. All the forms that we were asked to fill in, we filled in. And that's all she wrote. So we get this email and then, you know, we're a week away from the event. We're suddenly trying to scrabble around to try and work out what we're going to do next. I really want to say thank you to everyone who got in contact, either just to express their support, outrage, offering other venues. That was really a huge help. And now, having worked flat out, we've made sure that we haven't been silenced and that we can hold this in a new venue in some form. But it was a reminder, I suppose, that this issue of cancel culture definitely hasn't gone on.
Another thing that's worth stressing is that the subjects of this film and people, you know, who would have been attending the Q&A, not one of them has said anything hateful. And in fact, all of them have been exonerated at some stage in their case. I mean, we even had earlier this week Maxie Allen and Rosalind Levine, the first case study in the film, the Borehamwood parents who were arrested for complaining about their school, their child's school on WhatsApp. You know, they were given a payout of £20,000 for wrongful arrest. Jamie Michael, who is the final case study in the film, he was found not guilty by a jury. Alison Pearson, one of the Telegraph columnist, mainstream, Telegraph columnist, her arrest never went anywhere. So it's there's not even a case to say that these were particularly controversial speakers or that we're talking about a controversial issue.
No, I think that's exactly right. I mean, that's one of the themes of the film, is that we are talking to, in those 3 case studies, people who have been put through the ringer, who have been visited by police, who have in some cases been arrested, in Jamie's case actually been prosecuted and ended up in court, despite not having said anything the least bit hateful or criminally malicious. Of course, we stand up for free speech regardless of who the individual is or how toxic or hateful that their views might be. But one of the things we wanted to do with the film is to demonstrate that this could happen to anyone, even people who hold mainstream views, even people who have never bothered the police before, even people who didn't even realise they were committing some kind of offence when they supposedly committed this kind of offence. And as you say, everyone involved has either had their case thrown out, the investigation been found to be unlawful, or in other ways exonerated. So to suggest that anyone on there is particularly controversial, that anyone who was going to be on the panel, Alison Pearson and Jamie Michael being the people who are going to join me, are in some ways toxic and not to be platformed is for the birds, as you said.
Yeah, and in case anyone is still, I'm sure our viewers and listeners are not, but in case there's anyone out there still in doubt that this is a major issue, we're on about 30 people a day being arrested for speech crimes. Actually, just 2 speech crimes. There are many more that people can be arrested under. That's 12,000 a year. This is a really serious problem, and this is why we wanted to make this film. We wanted to, show the human face of this catastrophe.
No, absolutely. And one of the things that's interesting about that 30 arrests a day figure, which was a Times investigation, which looked specifically at 2 communications offences in the Communications Act and the Malicious Communications Act. There are other hate speech laws and so on, as you say, is that during the time that we've seen this skyrocketing of arrests for speech crime, the number of cases that actually get to the point of a conviction or a sentencing has actually dramatically gone down. So clearly there is a problem, not just with the law, but with the police, with a zealous pursuit of people for something as simple as complaining about your child's school on WhatsApp, as happened to the couple in Borehamwood. So it's a reminder this is a really important issue. I think I should also say that if anyone is out there wondering if this was some elaborate publicity stunt on our part to try and promote the film and promote our cause by getting cancelled, I clearly wasn't supposed to be on the podcast this week. So none of this has gone to plan.
This is supposed to be your week off. And, well, at least we do have some good news. We do have the good news that we do have a venue. We are going to screen this film. We're not going to be silenced. So if you've got a ticket already, please come as planned. We'll let you know the details in an email. And if you're interested in seeing the film, hopefully the controversy has at least piqued your interest, if nothing else, please email us to get on the waiting list at supporters@spiked-online.com. Thank you, Tom. See you soon.
Thank you.
Now, as we've just been discussing, censorship is all around us, and beating cancel culture can take a hell of a lot of effort when it rears its head in the real world. But when it comes to online censorship, thankfully there's an easy and effortless way to beat the censors, and that's thanks to our partners, Private Internet Access, or PIA for short. PIA is the VPN that I use and trust whenever I'm accessing the internet. A VPN, or virtual private network, is an app that hides your IP address and safeguards your internet connection through an encrypted tunnel. And it's not just that. Did you know that streaming services like Netflix and Prime Video have huge catalogues of content, but you can only access a tiny fraction of it from your own country? Using PIA to change your location opens up a whole new world of streaming. Paying for Netflix without using PIA is a bit like paying for front row seats at the cinema and being forced to sit in the hallway. PIA is also essential for keeping yourself safe online. It protects you from the prying eyes of hackers, internet service providers, and anyone else who might have an unhealthy interest in your personal information or online activity. Personally, I'd never go online again without it. And because PIA is available for all platforms, I never need to worry about my safety or privacy. It works on Windows, Apple Mac, iPhone, Android, and more. Even better, you only need one subscription to protect yourself across all of those devices. So, sign up now to the world's most transparent VPN provider and take advantage of our special offer. Spiked viewers and listeners can get 86% off a subscription to private internet access. That's just £1.67 a month. And you'll also get an extra 4 months thrown in completely for free. To take advantage of this incredible deal, just go to piavpn.com/spiked. That's piavpn.com/spiked. Signing up is totally risk-free. There's a 30-day money-back guarantee and 24/7 customer support. You will not regret it. Sign up now at piavpn.com/spiked. Right, so Labour Home Secretary Shabana Mahmood has introduced quite a sweeping range of new restrictions on legal and illegal immigration. She has billed this as the biggest shake-up of the asylum system in 20 years. Joe, I mean, we can get into a little bit as to whether we think any of this will work a bit later. But first of all, we should just comment on the tone of this. This is quite extraordinary coming from a Labour Home Secretary. It's certainly ruffled a few feathers within her own party. What's been your take on what's your immediate reaction to her announcement?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's, a very positive step in the right direction. And as you said, we can quibble over whether these things will actually work or whether they're actually a good idea or not. But I think what's really important is the very fact that Mahmood is looking to open up a conversation on the issue of migration. And she's actually prepared to say that it's a problem. Yeah. It's a problem that so many people are coming over in small boats and even the legal migration that we've had at such high levels has created very monocultural, in fact, communities and has not been great for integration and great for Britain. And it seems to me that it's not even any measures in particular that people find such a problem, people among the Labour Party backbenchers, Shabana Mahmood's opponents, but the very fact that she wants to talk about this. Yeah. And for me, I think that's what's so important about it, that she is actually saying, look, we have to be grown-ups as a country. We have to recognise that we've got a problem here and we have to be able to talk about what's been going on. And I think it just seems that there are so many people in the Labour Party who would far rather that we didn't talk about this, that we just ignored it, that we pretend that there is no problem at all, that everything's just hunky-dory. And I think she's done us a really great service by opening up this conversation.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. There does still seem to be slightly too many people in Labour, but maybe those in the government, perhaps whether they're looking at the polling figures, whether they're looking at the March of Reform UK, or whether maybe Shabana Mahmood just gets it. It seems as if this idea that they can't hide behind this idea that, oh, it's just a distraction from real issues. Migration isn't really a problem. That's just the right-wing press, going off on one. Clearly, this is something that people are feeling. People are genuinely have good cause to be angry about.
Absolutely. I think this is happening all over Europe as well. I mean, so you've got Shabana Mahmood announcing all these big changes she's making here, but there's even more radical changes in places like Greece, for instance, where they've suspended the asylum system as a whole. They feel it's lost all public legitimacy and it needs to be reworked and revamped. I think absolutely 100% Labour realise that if they are going to have any fighting chance in the next election, they have to start looking at this issue. This is the number one issue right now. That is what we need to be talking about. I'm personally a little bit sceptical of the reforms. I don't think they have strong enough deterrents built into them, like you have with, say, US and Australia, which had very successful models. I think a lot of what she's doing is kind of tinkering. My big fear is you've got this unelected, unaccountable bureaucracy in the Home Office, which are making utterly bizarre decisions when it comes to approving asylum claims, like very, very, very far adrift of common sense. Asylum claims that no one in the public would ever approve. They've got much more liberal ideas about who should be coming in. And I feel the public, it's kind of those decisions very opaque to the public, and the public are unhappy with it. They know something's wrong. And I'm not sure that she's making a big enough change to make that change.
I think what's interesting is that we can sit here and I agree, Candice, we can say, well, perhaps these changes are not actually that big after all and may not even have the impact that she's intending them to have. And yet the backlash to what she's come out with and suggested has been completely unhinged. I mean, to suggest that curbing migration is the equivalent of being a Nazi, being a fascist. You just look at the vocabulary that's been levelled against her, and it's just insane. The references are far right, Nazi, fascist. The insults have just come absolutely thick and fast. You can't help wondering if it's perhaps more so because of her being, to put it bluntly, a brown woman of Pakistani heritage herself, as if somehow she's like a traitor to the cause for daring to raise these issues. But I mean, you even had the spectacle on Radio 4 this morning of Lord Dubs, who came to the UK himself as a child, fled Nazi prosecution, as if he's held as some kind of moral arbiter now, and so he was being levelled and kind of weaponised against Shabana Mahmood. What would happen if there was a little Lord Dubs nowadays? You'd be quite happy to see him killed and persecuted and sent back to a war zone. And Shabana Mahmood had to point out quite reasonably, that Albania isn't actually a war zone. No one is being killed in Albania for their political beliefs or for their identity. And actually, the real problem is that when we say that if you have a child in this country, you're migrate or bring a child to this country, then you can never be returned. It actually incentivizes migrants putting young children in small boats and risking their lives to cross the channel. And that is deeply immoral.
Absolutely. And I think it's also very insulting to the public who are not instinctively, wanting to shut down pull up the drawbridge to anyone who is suffering from persecution or fleeing from war. I mean, there was huge public support for the Ukraine Family Scheme, for the relocation of Hong Kongers under CCP tyranny. We get when there is an issue like that needs to be dealt with. The fact that they can't see a difference between that and, say, the small boats crisis, which is basically just open organised crime, people trafficking happening in plain sight. The public knows that those two things are different, and they know that the asylum system is basically become a backdoor channel for illegal migration. And that's why clearly even the Labour Party recognises that it's got to change.
It does. But like I say, I think it's just baby steps. I don't think they're quite there yet. And I think that you can see even with the worklessness crisis as well, it's all couched in sort of, if you want to do something about it, you're cruel. You're a cruel person. It's mean. And I've had debates about that with people, talking about, for instance, I don't think people with depression and anxiety should be left to just rot at home, essentially, and never have a job. And I had someone actually say to me, you just hate disabled people. That's childish. Yeah. But honestly, I think that is the perspective. And I think that's one of the big disadvantages of Labour having the huge majority they have. I think a lot of people sort of saw this a while ago as the backbenchers are going to decide everything. And the cabinet really struggles to sort of get them in line and do sensible things. And
the backbenchers are still living in kind of la-la land, even if people in Number 10 bizarrely have their heads screwed to the ground a little bit more. One thing I did think is worth mentioning is that obviously Shabana Mahmood has been called a Nazi, a fascist. Actually, the real inspiration for this comes from Denmark, and not from the populist right in Denmark, but from the Social Democrats, who have been kind of pioneering this mixture of immigration control and, I guess, kind of bog standard social democratic left-wing economic policies. And they've had enormous electoral success as a result of this. Is this clearly people in Team Starmer recognise this, but the backbenchers obviously don't. They think it's immoral. Do they think that Denmark is run by Nazis? Do you remember when everyone used to love Scandinavia, when the left used to fawn over Scandinavia? I don't think you don't hear much of that anymore.
I think it's bizarre that in the run-up to the last, just after Labour won the last election, you'd have all these newspaper columnists kind of fawning all over Keir Starmer and it's so amazing that the adults are back in the room. And you heard that phrase again and again, the adults are back in charge, the sensible people are back back in control. Well, when it comes to migration, we can make the case for people who are fleeing war zones, and I absolutely agree that we should do that. But there is also an economic reality to taking migrants who are, as Candice says, going to end up on the benefit system. And Shabana Mahmood was saying that the cost of having a migrant on benefits is £30,000 a year. Every single year that they're on benefits, that's £30,000, and 500 migrants a day are signing up to being on benefits. So, like, for all these are the adults in the room, supposedly, they're not very good at maths because, you carry on at that rate. And there is just an economic cost that a country is being expected to bear that we do not have the capacity in our economy. I mean, we'll come on and talk about that later, I'm sure. But if we had a very, very productive economy, this might be no problem at all. But like I say, for the adults in the room, they're not very good at the basic maths on all of this.
And another really interesting point that she made was actually that if you have uncontrolled immigration as we do now, that this is destabilizing communities and leading to racism. And she, used quite strong language. She talked about her experience of being called to quote her. I think that's quite an interesting argument, isn't it, Candice, to say that actually if you have unstable communities, if you don't know who's coming in and out, actually that can have a negative effect on the people of colour who are living here and who are settled, and people might assume that they we don't know anything about them, they might not belong here.
Yeah, what I'm also finding as well with this discussion that you're getting this very negative attitude to immigration and migration as a whole, whereas people were quite relaxed about it, maybe 10 years ago, especially after Brexit. You saw a lot of the concerns about immigration really diminished because people felt they had that sense of control. But when you take it away from them, as it was with the European Union, for instance, then they start getting angry about it. And then you start seeing these concerns rising again. And then you'll sort of get like very sort of negative attitudes. I think that the number one thing is people need to feel they have control over it. They have control over who's coming in and out of their country, who's part of their community. All of these things are legitimate questions. But I think that on the left, unfortunately, it's framed as racism. If you even talk about this or say anything in terms of like community or identity, you are a bigot and you are shut down. So they've never been able to develop a sort of sophisticated, sensible idea about stuff like this. And
that on that point of control, Joe, I mean, it seems like the missing part, or I think this is maybe not missing because it's deliberate, in Shabana's plan, is that it's going out of its way not to leave the European Convention on Human Rights. She says, she will pass legislation to direct judges to have a more diminished view of what family life means. Are they just simply, I mean, obviously we know Keir Starmer is completely wedded to the European Convention, but are they just shooting themselves in the foot here by not grasping the nettle? I think this seems to me is the thing that's going to trip them up.
I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right. And I think that's why she can say all these things. And I'm glad she's saying them. I'm glad we're having this conversation. But without leaving the ECHR, I think this is a pipe dream. I can't see any of these changes happening. But just to come back to this point about racism, which I think is a really important one, I think for me, the important thing that goes hand in hand with migration is integration. And I think we can be a much more welcoming society if we're prepared to take the time and effort to integrate people. And I think one problem with sheer volume that we've seen over recent years is that in and of itself makes the process of integration more difficult. When you've got rapidly changing communities, it becomes more difficult to integrate people. But when we no longer seem to have a sense or struggle to articulate actually what it means to be British, well, what exactly is it that you're integrating people into? When all we are as a country, sometimes it seems, is an NHS and a benefit system, it's very difficult to then promote a positive vision that you want to integrate people into. But if you look at the detail of what actually goes on in Denmark, it seems that hand in hand with restricting migration, they really go to quite considerable efforts to break up communities that they think are becoming ghettoised, and to actually almost force, to take a very tough line on actually enforcing integration within Danish society. And I think that's exactly what we need to happen here. But I just, exactly as you're saying, Fraser, I can't see us having the guts in our society. I can't see lawyers and the Labour Party being happy to say, well, actually, we do need to go to parts of Birmingham. We do need to go to parts of Bradford, which have become very ghettoised communities. And actually, in the interests of the people in those areas, enforce a much tougher line on integration and a much more robust sense of what it means to be British, what it means to be part of our society. And this is our expectation, that you will learn to speak English, that you will get a job, that you will contribute to our society, and in return we will be very welcoming of you.
Now, we've talked about Britain as an NHS and welfare state, and now we need to pay for all of that stuff. Rachel Reeves has been floating all kinds of ideas as to how to fill her black hole. The size of the black hole seems to vary week by week, depending on who you talk to, depending who's making the prediction at any one time. She even rolled the pitch for a big rise in income tax, and now has said we don't need to do a rise in income tax. One of the ideas that I think has really caught the imagination and has really got rid of people talking is the proposed milkshake tax. Now, this is obviously not going to raise huge amounts of money, but this is basically an extension on the existing sugary drinks levy. So people will know if you buy your full-fat Coke, it's slightly more expensive than the Diet Coke because it's got the sugar tax on it. And until perhaps this budget, any dairy products are exempt. So your milkshakes, your frappuccinos, all going to go up in price. Candice, what do you make of this? Is this the thing that's going to save the UK economy, get us out of fiscal crisis?
Well, it's going to be a crisis for my household. Let's just say this. I mean, suddenly it's going to cost a lot more to buy milkshakes. Yeah, I mean, I think this speaks to so much about where the current left is and what this government represents. Deeply unimaginative, hectoring, nannying, everything. They have this they're on a moral crusade. They've got no real ideas about growth, about how to get things going. In fact, everything they've done has destroyed growth. Yeah. Instead, they're just tinkering around the edges, trying to save our souls. We're all just so stupid, stuffing our kids' faces with loads of sugar. We need to be deterred from doing so. And actually, this budget, I don't think people are dreading it. And what's amazing to me is that they could not foresee just how badly all of this would go down. It's like they have no idea how much financial pressure people are under. That's why people don't want income tax to go up. We're already spending enough. But everything she's done so far has not worked, and she's completely arrogant about it. They are completely arrogant. Their attitude is that the public just can't stomach the changes that need to be made. It's nothing to do with them, nothing to do with their profligacy and their irrationality and their incompetence. It's us. We're the problem because we won't take it.
And because we won't eat healthily and lessen the burden on the NHS. I do feel like, I don't want to focus too much on this particular tax because obviously, as you're right, Candice, this is a much bigger issue about the budget, and it's hard to recall a budget that people have been treading so much. But it does feel like nanny state measures are the last refuge of, the sort of empty politician. If you don't have an idea or an ideology, you ban something or you tax it or you make it make life a bit less fun. What do you think, Jo?
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I don't even know about the I agree. I think what's interesting is that clearly, really, really big, serious ideas are needed to lift us out of the economic mess that we're in. And there are two different approaches that Rachel Reeves could take, that anybody could take. Either you grow the economy, and for me, the number one way to do that right now would be to absolutely scrap every single bit of net zero legislation and really focus on getting cheap energy to the country. So you could really focus on growing the economy, or if you can't quite bring yourself to do that, you could really focus on cutting spending, cut the welfare budget. Let's not be an NHS with a country attached. Let's be a country with a decent health service that treats sick people but doesn't waste millions and millions of pounds on diversity officers and political initiatives. So you could cut spending or you could grow the economy. And it just seems like whichever way Rachel Reeves goes when she tries to do either of those things, she meets opposition from the Labour Party backbenchers. they were elected on the ticket, if you remember, in the run-up to the last election, of growth.
Yeah.
We were promised house building. I think you could probably count on the fingers of one hand, the number of new houses that have been actually built since the Labour Party came into office. This promised growth has just not materialised. Well, obviously it's not materialised because it takes more than just saying the word growth to actually make the economy grow. But I think it's just, as Candice says, a real sign of the times that unable to make the case for growth, unable to make the case for actually cutting welfare spending. The only thing that Reeves knows that her backbenchers will actually agree to nod through is these restrictions on the way we behave as individuals. But I think you're absolutely right as well. This seems like a fairly benign measure. It'll only be a few extra pence. Probably, I read somewhere that I'm sure, we'll reduce the calorie content across the nation by like the equivalent of half a grape or something like that, minimal impact on people's diet, but will have a bit of an impact on family budgets. I might not have done at another point in time, but at this point when grocery shopping, the cost of it is going up so much, and if you're trying to buy food for a family week in, week out, actually even just these few pennies here and few pennies there really do begin to add up. And this will not bring much money in for the Treasury whatsoever, but will have a real impact on people's family finances.
And food inflation running much higher than general inflation, which is really, really quite shocking. You mentioned house building. There's some statistics that came out this week that suggested that house building is actually going about at the same pace as it was during the pandemic. So when we had lockdown, social distancing, and house building was supposed to be Labour's key target. This was actually, those of us who grumbled a bit when Labour got in thought, well, maybe this will be the saving grace. Solving the housing crisis in the UK would unlock so many other things. So much money is wasted. So much potential is wasted on going into rent and into excessive mortgages and things like that. But no, they can't even get that right.
Well, people said it at the time, property experts, they said that house building is dominated by the big house builders and you can't just get them to build. They're not going to do that. There's also so many planning regulations as well. A lot of it's net zero. Houses have to be built a certain way so that it doesn't incentivize house builders to even get into the business in the first place. There's all these obstacles, and it's so true. They just speak in rhetoric, but they're not willing to confront any of the structural issues that are preventing this from happening. And I think the big thing now, one of the really sad things is you speak to people in their 20s and they're just despairing at the thought of ever owning their own house. I mean, that was something that 2 generations ago people were absolutely thrilled to be able to do, and now people just think, oh, I'll never be able to do it, I'll never own my own home. And it's almost this nihilism is setting in.
Yeah, and finally, not to end on too bleak a note, but more statistics have come out that saying that the Office for National Statistics wildly underestimated the amount of people leaving the country. Are people simply voting with their feet against the state of the UK economy, which is very sad, of course?
I think they are. I think for young people especially, moving abroad does seem like a much more attractive proposition when you face very few job prospects in this country. I don't blame them. I think that would be a sensible thing to do. But I think the other statistics that have come out today, which are equally as depressing, is the increasing proportion of young people, so this is under the age of 24, who are classified as NEET, so not in education, employment and training. And they're saying one of the reasons for this is that the jobs which have been done away with are the so-called entry-level jobs. So, I mean, you could even go down to the kind of, I remember when I was kind of 13, 14, having a Saturday job, and then whilst you're at university, you work in restaurants and cafes. And it's these kind of jobs that give you a work ethic, I guess, and introduce you to the labour market in the first place and get you used to going out to work and earning money. When those kind of jobs are done away with, it then makes it more difficult for people to get the next stage up on the ladder. And there's been a lot of attention about the crisis in graduate recruitment, but actually, you people with a degree at least are managing to get some kind of job for the most part. People without degrees are struggling to get any kind of job at all. And again, I would put a lot of this down to decisions that have been made around Britain. It's got some of the highest energy prices in the whole of the Western world, higher than nearly every other country in the world. And of course, that has a knock-on effect, not just on factories and big kind of heavy industry, but when you run a fish and chip shop or a hairdressing salon, your bills have gone up. It's going to be much more difficult for you then to take on a new member of staff. And this is having a knock-on effect across society now.
They say that as well. It's also why the cost of childcare is so high, because the nurseries have to pay huge housing costs, huge energy costs. All of that factors into how much they charge parents.
Well, it's a bit of a bleak ending to this section of the podcast, but I promise you, Spike Podcast Unlocked is going to be a lot more upbeat because we're going to be talking about the very colourful Zach Polanski.
He's obviously very, very confused about biology in some respects, and yet seems to be able to recognise breasts when he comes across them. So it's all a little bit odd.
We'll be talking also about the crisis in our universities, what's going on with free speech, what's going on with anti-Semitism, and finally we will discuss the death of DEI at Disney. So if you're a Spike supporter, please tune in for that. And if you're not a Spike supporter, sign up now so you can listen to the rest of that conversation. Go to spiked-online.com/support. Thank you so much for watching the Spike podcast, and thank you to our friends at Private Internet Access for sponsoring us. Now's the time to take control of your digital life and get PI8 for 86% off. Click the link in the description below or scan the QR code. And remember, if you're a Spiked supporter, then this episode isn't over yet. You can now watch the Spiked podcast Unlocked. Just go to the Spiked website, log in, and you'll see it on the homepage. So join us right now.